Same sincerity, same lack of pretense, but completely incompatible interfaces. The result wasn't collaboration, it was exclusion. People treat authenticity like it's the ideal way to be. Like once you figure out who you are, everything else just sorts itself out. But if that were true, why isn't it more common? I think it's because authenticity has a cost. But it's also only one of several ways that people interface with the world. And every one of those ways comes with trade-offs, no exceptions. But I'm going to pick on authenticity, not to suggest it's bad, but I think it's due for a little disillusionment. This isn't about whether or not people should be authentic, but it's about what life is like when they are. And I don't think this is about personality types, or Myers-Briggs, or zodiac signs. I think it's about something deeper, something that most of us feel but don't really have a name for. For now, I'll call it a world interface. A world interface is the way a person learns to meet reality, long before they consciously choose how to be. It's shaped by what worked, what kept you safe, what got you included, and what reduced friction. It explains why two people can see the same situation and immediately reach for different responses, or arrive at different conclusions. Not because one is right, but because their interface tells them what's safe to do next. Authenticity is one possible world interface. Not the only one, and not the best one. Just one that prioritizes transparency above all. If someone's world interface is built around authenticity, it tends to be low compression, meaning less filtering, less performance, and less social buffering. It can look like impulsivity, but it's really just less waiting for permission from the room. What you notice, feel, or think tends to surface closer to the moment that it actually happens. That reduces internal friction, and that's the appeal. But it also increases external friction. That's the cost. Because most people aren't operating that way. Some people interface with the world more transactionally, not in a villainous way, just functionally. They're attuned to the relationship between action and reaction, and they try to leverage that relationship in their favor. There's often an unspoken assumption of exchange in conversation. Attention, opportunity, usefulness, leverage. Transactional interfaces are optimized for predictability, and predictability feels safe. But when they encounter an authentic person, someone who doesn't position themselves in response, who doesn't play the exchange game, it creates a mismatch. Confusion sets in, sometimes suspicion. Because in a transactional interface, if someone isn't extracting, it can feel like they're withholding, or worse, manipulating. We tend to assume that people are operating under the same rules that our own interface sets. So when the expected response never arrives, it can feel like a red flag. When two people are transactional, communication is usually easy. Reality is shared. But that's not always what happens when two authentic people meet. I used to go to a local music jam session. Anyone could show up, and anyone could play. One night, two local legends walked in, and both of them were insanely talented. Both eccentric, and both undeniably authentic. I was excited to see them meet. One was a drummer, let's call him Dan, and the other was a guitarist, John. You'd think this would be magic, but what actually happened was uncomfortable. Dan starts playing this wild, complex beat, clearly testing. John locks in and follows. As soon as John adapts, Dan changes the beat. Then John pivots. Dan changes the time signature. John pivots again. Dan wasn't performing, and he wasn't posturing. This was his authentic way of engaging, but his authenticity expressed itself as disruption. John's authenticity, on the other hand, expressed itself as responsiveness. Same sincerity, same lack of pretense, but completely incompatible interfaces. The result wasn't collaboration, it was exclusion. Everyone else in the room just stopped playing. We became observers. And that's when it clicked for me. Authenticity has nothing to do with personality. and it doesn't guarantee harmony. It says, here's the truth of the world as I see it. And when someone else does the same, those truths rarely align. Some interfaces simply don't compose well together. Now, like we said, authenticity prioritizes transparency. And transparency is often read as vulnerability. But for someone whose vulnerability is rare and situational, encountering it can feel significant, like something special is forming. But for the authentic person, nothing special happened at all. That's just their baseline. When vulnerability is your standard way of being, other people experience it as an event. That asymmetry creates misunderstanding, intensity where it wasn't intended, and closeness that isn't always mutual. Neither person is wrong here. They just have different ideas of what's typical. This is the real cost of authenticity. Not loneliness, not alienation, though those can be byproducts. The real cost is fewer shared realities, and fewer places where you don't have to translate yourself. Social circles don't just get smaller, they get more specific and less tolerant of mismatch. None of this means authenticity should be avoided or sought after. We sometimes put it on a pedestal because it's less common and it can look like freedom. And in some ways it is, and in others, not so much. It's just one way of interfacing with the world, one configuration among many. Authenticity tends to live most peacefully in environments with low social friction. Art being the obvious example, but not the only one. Problems start when we assume that everybody's running the same interface. But a lot of unnecessary friction disappears when you realize the confusion isn't personal, it's structural.